and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I'm your host, Shawn Needham, along with my wonderful wife, Janet, and we are streaming live from the Team Needham podcast studio. And we are super excited to have Jason Gootman back on our show. We are going to be busting the myth about eating healthy is expensive. We hear it all the time how, well, if eating healthy was just less expensive, then, I would eat better. And we hear people blaming the system for their obesity or their health, when in reality, it's the choices they're making. So we're excited to dive in. We're going to give some examples of how you can eat for literally dollars a day. Jason, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your history, and then we'll get started in busting the myth.
Keep it simple about me. I run a private wellness coaching practice. So what I do on a daily basis, on a week in, week out basis, is help people learn to eat better, exercise more, and take better care of themselves in general. And part of that lends itself very well to today's topic, because a big part of that is helping people eat well. And the question comes up in my practice. How can I do this? How can I do this affordably? And it's very easy to get to the bottom of that once we start to look at things as they are and not just the things we're hearing.
Yeah. So I'll just bring up a quick example. Last night I was talking to somebody when it came to some health issues, and I told him, I said, focus on carnivore and, see if that helps you, if that helps them. And somebody behind her said, we were at a big event, and somebody behind her said, oh, and make sure it's grass-fed beef, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I didn't really have a chance to talk about the differences and what I thought about it. But I mean, I think part of the problem is that when people think about eating healthy, they think about, I got to eat organic, or I got to have grass-fed beef, or I got to have XYZ. I can't even think of some things you can add to this. But, so then in reality, what it is, it creates a barrier. It's like, well, grass-fed beef is $16.99 a pound. I don't want to, I can't afford that. Sure. So it creates a barrier already. So go ahead and comment on that.
Well, I think that, that speaks to the cost conversation, but it speaks maybe to a larger conversation, which is like the perfectionism trap, right? That if I'm going to eat better, I need to go from, many people in our circles are talking about all the crap that's out there, right? So the idea for many people is you got to go from all this crap to the most optimal way of eating possible. And there are many gradients in there that are possible and would represent a better way of eating, while still being far short of what many of us would describe as something like optimal. And that stops us in our tracks. It doesn't help when we're trying to make a lifestyle improvement to try to go from 0 to 100 miles an hour. Right. So I think it's a great first step to just say, well, how could you eat 10% better, 20% better, 30% better next week or next month? And I think when people approach it that way, they'll see almost no change in their costs, and in many cases, a reduction in their costs. It costs, yes, with subsidies and other factors, it's possible to make junk food relatively inexpensively, but it still costs money to bring all kinds of ingredients into a factory and then run them through all kinds of machines and then ship them all over the place. Whereas, something like buying fish from my local fish market. I live in an ocean town. There's not a lot that had to go into that. So the fish is always relatively inexpensive. So that's what I encourage you. Think basics. Think very, very, very basics first. And when you do that, I think that the cost total, it becomes obvious that the cost total is non-significant.
And just to correct you a little bit, Jason, I think the fisherman that caught that fish would say a lot went into it.
Yeah, I would say that too, especially how
I'm just saying.
The water is down there. Of course, I mean that it's a relatively simple transaction, right? They're
right.
They get the fish, they bring it in. Someone cleans it and fillets it, and we're ready to go. And I think the whole world of adulterated food is, is a factory in Cleveland making food out of some ingredients that came from California and some ingredients that came from Florida and some ingredients that came from Costa Rica and, all the things. And there's costs involved in that.
Well, I'm going to use this example right here about, because you said you could actually save money by eating healthy. I like to use the Cocoa Pebbles example because I used to eat a lot growing up, and even before we changed our diet a decade or so ago. And look at a box of Cocoa Pebbles, $6.49.
Wow.
And I think that box is 27.5 ounces. So a little bit, not quite 2 pounds. But I will tell you, I could eat that whole box of Cocoa Pebbles and not be full. I guarantee it. Now, because I'm not used to it, I might throw up afterwards. But, I mean, seriously. And whereas, that's not quite 2 pounds, but 2 pounds of ground beef, I can't eat 2 pounds of ground beef. Some people can.
Right.
I cannot.
Right.
And yet, ground beef is going to be probably about the same price, but you're going to eat a lot less of it.
That's right. I mean, see, there's fun ways to do some math with all of this. One is something like dollars per kilocalorie, and then even more interesting is dollars per various micronutrients. And then it's just there's just no competition. It's not even fair, right? So that $6+ on that Cocoa Pebbles is leaving you with nothing. And if you're going to spend the same amount on basically any real food, you're going to end up with significantly more nutrients going into your body, and that's part of feeling satisfied, right? Part of what drives satiety is that our body's actually getting what it needs. When you have 1,000 kilocalories of Cocoa Pebbles, your body says, "Thanks for the energy. I'm still way short on several minerals, several vitamins, and other things. So I'm still hungry." So yeah, I don't buy the idea that someone on a lower budget needs to buy lower quality food in order to meet their needs for survival, because that food essentially isn't satisfying, makes you want to have more, and so it just doesn't work, when you really do the math.
Yeah, and one of the things that mostly a processed box food is lacking is macronutrients, and especially protein. There's usually a lot of carbohydrates in this stuff, but there's not a lot of protein. And I like to use the example of chicken. I mean, chicken is one of the cheapest sources of protein. You can get chicken for $2.99 a pound sometimes. And I'll tell you what, Jason, I'm not a big chicken fan. I'll be honest with you. It's just too lean and dry for me.
Sure.
But I'll be really honest with you. There is no way I could eat a pound of chicken for $2.99. And there is no way I could eat a pound of chicken.
Yeah, and part of this is cool because it's we're talking about solving the cost challenge. We're also solving the what we might call the overeating challenge, right? So there's no shortage of kilocalories of food all around us. I mean, that might be the problem, is that we have such easy access to energy, but most of it has almost nothing in the way of micronutrients. And even the carbohydrate-rich adulterated food is low in fiber because it's been adulterated so much. So none of the things that cue satiety, fiber, fat, protein, and micronutrients is available in those foods. So it's really sort of messing with our how we're wired. So it's really, really clear that really no value in eating that way. And then, as we're starting to get into, it's a false idea that the only way out is to be super rich and spend $300-400 a person on food a week. That's what a lot of people are using as sort of an individual excuse. I think it's become sort of political. The idea is that there's nothing an individual can do. We must create some sort of political system that delivers the most optimal, nutritious food right to people's doors, or no one's ever going to be able to eat well. We know that's not true, because we know ourselves and plenty of people in our lives that are able to eat well in the current environment.
Jenny, you had some comments?
Well, just having an empty house of two boys going through our house, there was a time where they were growing and they really, wanted food. And really, one of the things that we started pulling out for them is, hey, make yourself some hamburger, make yourself some oatmeal, and literally Jordan would eat a Pyrex bowl of oatmeal as well as probably beef. But, you can buy a bag of that versus the box. Because there's no way I was going to afford one sitting of Cocoa Pebbles for a 16, 17, 18-year-old boy, because that wasn't going to end the whole thing. Right. So, finding, when you go to buy, we bought a big bag of oatmeal for him. And, we had plenty of meat and eggs. Eggs is another, source of, like for myself, I always think, oh, I'm going to have two, and I end up with one. Right.
That's right.
So it's subtle things that you do with food that actually has nutrients that satisfy you versus just dumping that sugar in. And I actually think, especially when you're talking about growing children, they really need those nutrients outside of just the sugar, because the sugar isn't going to help build, all those tendons and muscles and brains, like I think even like when you go to like McDonald's, I can't imagine how much it would have taken to feed that boy growing. We would have been broke by the time we left. But I could buy how many would we buy at a time of eggs? It would be like one of those
five dozen, right? 60, 5 dozen.
And I realize eggs prices have went up, but man,
eggs are still 10 cents each. And I'm lucky. I know when I'm really hungry, I'll tell Janet, oh, make me 3 eggs. After the second one, I'm done. Eggs are some of the most satiating foods around because they are packed with nutrients.
Vegetables and meat are obviously, keys to an optimal, optimal way of eating. And you can also do quite well with, maybe we'll call these fillers. Off air, Shawn and I were also talking about beans, things like you mentioned, Janet. Oats. I'd put rice in the same category.
Yeah, right. I was going to say the same. Yeah,
absolutely.
Beans. They're great way. And off air, Shawn and I were talking about cans of beans for something like 79 cents, 89 cents, 99 cents. That's the more expensive version of beans. If you buy the big bag, kind of like you're talking about, Janet, and do the soak them yourself, I don't even know what the cost comparison would be, but it's got to be. I know it's cheaper than canned beans, maybe even half as much, and you're not getting the same kind of nutrients that are in vegetables and meat and fruit and nuts and seeds, but you're getting much more than you're getting in anything that's been sincerely adulterated. And whether it's for growing kids or very, very, very active athletes, I think those kind of foods are a great way to get the energy intake up. And you can, it's very easy to sort of buffer the sort of higher carbohydrate content. Like you have rice with another relatively inexpensive staple food, something like butter. So it's something very simple to prepare, relatively inexpensive, and you're getting a more satiating combination there. There's some, if it's decent rice, there's still some fiber in it, and you've got some high quality butter. Not as nutrient dense as meat, but an animal food that's got some legitimate nutrients in it, and then you don't have this 100% carbohydrate meal. You've got it balanced with with some fat, and you got something decent there.
Yeah, and imagine, if you do want to save some money because you think the meat is more expensive, there's no doubt about it. But if you think you can't afford just the meat, then do exactly what you're saying. Cook the meat up, put some rice in there, put some beans in there, and even on top of that, throw a few eggs in there. And I guarantee you can eat for dollars a day. I mean, a few dollars a day if you ate that, because you're going to eat. If you ate 3 servings of that, and each serving is probably like 800 calories, I guarantee you it's going to be less than $2 a day. I mean, seriously. I mean, that's how easy it is to eat inexpensively. Don't you have some examples of some prices and stuff that you set up?
Yeah, let me just get to the right place in my notes. This is one thing I worked out one time. This sort of speaks to the cost idea, but also to the people will say access or availability. So I looked it up, and this is a year or two old, so these numbers aren't 100% accurate to today, but I'm sure they're still very close. There are, what I did is I looked up food at Walmart, because there are at the time there were 4,472 Walmart stores in the United States. So there, and I also in a post I wrote about this, I showed a link that showed Walmarts in urban areas and Walmarts in rural areas. So they're sort of everywhere. Nobody's too far from a Walmart. And what I did is I sort of specced out a meal that was 2 cans of black beans, a can of tuna, and a tablespoon of olive oil. That the whole meal comes to $2.53, and that's 1,040 kilocalories. So that's as we're talking about, most people walking around don't need more than
they need about half that for a meal. About half that.
That's right. And so I did that. Actually, I think I have it just a little lower. If you change it to 1 can of beans, it's a 620 kilocalorie meal for $1.75.
Right.
We're talking about, we could poke holes in that meal. It's not if we're talking about an optimum performance kind of meal, we could find some legitimate holes in that. But on a spectrum where one end of the spectrum is like the junkiest junk food, and the other end of the spectrum is the most optimal way of eating, I would put a meal like that something like 70 or 80 on that. If 100 is the optimal meal and 0 is the junkiest junk food meal, I'd give that like somewhere between 70 and 90. Like it's a lot closer to optimal than it is close to terrible, right? And there you go, 253. And then I got a few comparisons. So at that same time, it's fun to say the full names of these, because they sort of talk about their ridiculousness. A spicy chicken sandwich deluxe at Chick-fil-A. The spicy chicken deluxe meal, so that was the sandwich, and it came with a side or something like that, was $8.49. A double bacon quarter pounder with cheese meal at McDonald's at that same time a year or two ago was $9.99. And a cheesy gordita crunch combo, that was the one that sounds silly, at Taco Bell was $5.89. So when people say people are running through the drive-thrus at places like Chick-fil-A and McDonald's and Taco Bell because they can extend their dollar more that way, politely we'd say what? We call bullshit, right? Like that's just doesn't add up. And so so I thought that was a decent example.
Well, and here's one of the things. I did something similar a few years ago, and the pricing is going to be different now. But I went to McDonald's and I bought I bought a hamburger. I bought a hamburger at McDonald's, and I did 2 separate comparisons. I bought a hamburger at McDonald's, which was like $3.75, and it was like 300 calories. And then I went to the grocery store and I bought a chicken breast, some broccoli, and some potatoes. And I set them out on a plate. The broccoli, the potatoes, and the chicken filled up the plate.
Mhm.
And it just, I think we're trained, Jason. I think our bodies are trained, our brains are trained to look at something and see if it's healthy or not.
Sure.
I mean, seriously, I don't think you have to learn that. And you see the hamburger sitting in the middle of the plate. It doesn't take up much space. What is healthier, right? Both of them are about the same price. They're under $4.
Cool.
And I definitely could have, if I would have brought broccoli in bulk, and you buy potatoes in bulk, that's another thing. Potatoes, cheap food. Very, very.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think
Yeah.
potatoes, even sweet potatoes, are relatively inexpensive.
Yeah.
And a great way to get a starchy food, a carbohydrate-rich food that's got a lot more in it than Cocoa Pebbles and all these other things that are just the purely adulterated carbohydrates.
And just for the record, we live in the potato county in the nation. We grow more potatoes in our backyard in Grant County than any other county in the nation.
Wow.
So I had to put a plug in there for potatoes. I mean, just had to. And it is incredible. I am just surprised. I'll pick up a bag of potatoes, and we don't get the big bags anymore. I'm not a big fan of the big baker type potatoes. We like the fingerlings, which are more expensive, but still, you pick up a 10-pound bag of potatoes, and it's like a few dollars. And it's like, how does a farmer make money? I mean, you really got to ask. It's like, this is such cheap food, So anyway, back to the hamburger story. Here's the reality. It's even more so than what you say, because people say, well, I'm going to go to, I'm going to go to McDonald's, and I'm going to eat healthy. I'm going to eat off the dollar menu, whatever it is, maybe it's a $2 menu now. I don't know. And of course, McDonald's is pretty smart. They're smart at marketing. They know that they reel you in with that dollar menu. I'm going to eat cheap, and that's it. And then you look at the menu and you're like, oh, well, no, yeah, I could get the double bacon cheeseburger. Why not? Oh, well, you don't save any money if you don't have the French fries, so you might as well have them. Oh, you're right. And if you supersize it, it's only 39 cents more.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got these little ices for dessert too. Or an apple pie. You might as well add that. Next thing you know, you spent $15 in the drive-thru. I am not kidding. I did this. I bought all that junk, and it was literally $15. This is a few years ago, because I bought the big 48-ounce soda that's sugared. I mean, so there's like 1,500 calories right there in the soda.
Right.
Anyway, I mean, it was 2,500 calories and $15. I mean, just it's unreal when people eat that stuff 2 or 3 times a day, and they think they're saving money. They're just, that fast food's a lot cheaper. No, it's not.
Your comparison of that day you had brought the hamburger home, and then also bought some meat on your own and some potatoes and vegetables, if I'm remembering right, is that's an important part of this conversation. Is there a lot of people have lost interest in cooking, and then there's almost like an adjacent conversation that to cook your own food takes inordinate amounts of time, right? I almost think that's another one of these sort of false gaps, right? You don't need to go from going through the drive-through to cooking like Martha Stewart, right? Like you can do things like roast potatoes, steam potatoes, and add a little butter. Cook rice, cooking beef, cooking chicken, cooking fish is very easy. Doesn't take a lot of time. Many of these things can be cooked in bulk and leftovers made and all of that. But even conceding that cooking your own food does take some more time, I think that's a conversation worth having, because time is sort of what you spend time on is what you value, right? And if we value our well-being, we must come back to valuing food. And if we value food, we must be able to make some time in our day for cooking food, or we're lying to ourselves about what we value, right? Because if we can spend hours scrolling social media or
Yeah.
watching Netflix or whatever it is, and say there's no time for food preparation around here. I think that's just a conversation we have to disrupt. Within an individual's life or a family's life, there's ways to share these duties, and not to be dramatic, but I think we sort of need to make cooking sacred again. We just sort of need to make it part of our lives, and not just a chore. It's fun to, I don't know about,
Oh,
but,
for sure.
like to hang out in the kitchen and you got some music playing and someone's cooking over here and someone's cooking over here. And I actually think, to your point, Shawn, about being able to having it sort of be intuitive or instinctual to look at a plate of food and be able to tell if it's nutritious or not. I think, having sort of like a food culture in your community and your family is innate to us. And we're living in this strange time where it's all been outsourced, and we've been led to believe that we can live a life where we just sort of, all we do is sort of grab convenience food and eat, and we don't need to have a more intricate relationship with food than that. And I actually don't think we can eat well and support our well-being without having some sort of a more sacred relationship with food. I know that's a little out there, but I can tell.
No, it creates, cooking together creates community, in my opinion.
Well,
And if you look at what we did for generations and generations, that's what we did.
Well, I agree with that, because I feel like, other cultures throughout the world, if you look like maybe Italy, or even we were in Argentina, and it's like when you come together for a meal, it wasn't just about the food. It was also about the interactions that you had during your meal. So it wasn't like you just inhaled food and off you went.
Mm-hmm.
You were eating in a more community fashion, like you were interacting with one another.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, even from a friend that I have that's from Argentina, when you were making and prepping the food, that was a whole process of it, right? Italy would be the same example. Or even if you look at France, I mean, a lot of the servings of French food is very, very small, and it's very
Rich.
dense and rich.
Mm-hmm.
But it's this process that we go through. And I think in America, what we've decided is just inhale and off you go. And, we're going to snack here, or we're going to grab here or grab there. Where I think in other cultures at other times, we were enjoying it with conversation with other people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the mindset changes. I mean, one of the things that Shawn and I have realized too is that if you are eating slower, like when we have guests over, especially during holidays, our food is not sitting on the dining room table. They have to get up and go to the kitchen to gather and come back. Mm-hmm. So the conversation at the table isn't just focused on that food. Mm-hmm. It's part of the meal is conversation and interaction. And so you lose that, just that drive to you have to just, put that garbage down the garbage, disposal to be satisfied, and really that it's part of the experience, right? We experience, and I know people aren't as connected in community as maybe we should be. Mm-hmm. That could be part of it.
This is a great way to get us back, because we got to eat, right? So we might as well reinvent the idea that it's worth spending an hour in the late afternoon, early evening, cooking together and eating slowly together and having conversation together, because it solves. I've talked about this idea a few times. It's both are relevant to our conversation. I said, if put away all the fancy, complex conversations about how to make our people in our society, better off and live with better well-being, to two things: shop at your local farmer's market. Yep. As opposed to shopping at a big box store or something like that.
I agree.
And make family dinner cool again. So if you just think about it, if we just did those two things, and you don't even think about macronutrients and micronutrients, just have a movement where more people are buying food from their local farmers, whether it's at a farmer's market or a food co-op or a local butcher shop or a local fish market. And then within families, making family dinner cool again, the food quality goes up. Even physiologically, we're going to digest food better when we're eating it in a social, relaxed environment than if we're eating it in our car or something like that. I love that idea that if we just sort of return to doing a couple of simple things like that, a lot of things get better.
Oh, right. And like you say, return to it. I mean, think about what our ancestors did generations and generations ago. First of all, they would hunt together, or they would pick vegetables out of the garden together, and then they would prep it together. And not once, I get a little bit fired up, but not really, because I get it that we need to talk to people about maximizing their protein. But when did our ancestors, Jason, look at a deer and say, I wonder how much protein is that in that, and how much fat and carbohydrates?
Right.
When did they ever say that?
Right.
Or when they dug potatoes out of the garden or picked strawberries, did they ever say, man, I don't know, the glycemic index on these might be pretty high?
That's right.
It's kind of hysterical, really.
It's kind of hysterical. It's kind of, I'll use this word non-judgmentally, but descriptively, it's kind of neurotic.
Right.
Like, and it actually, and it's ineffective, right? Like if you polled 100 people on the streets in 1930, how many people could identify these words like macronutrient, micronutrient, phytonutrient, right? The amount of people would be very low. And if you polled people today, the amount of people would be very high. And yet our well-being outcomes are significantly worse. So that tells me, more information, more knowledge, isn't the answer. It's more of these like readopting these ways of life that make all of this work. So this is actually kind of a fun debate. So like, people will talk about having like nutrition education in schools. And I think a fun debate would be, what would be more helpful? A class about nutrition education and these, fancy terminology that we're talking about, or a cooking class? My sense, even though I'm a nutritionist, even though I can talk that fancy language, even though I can make some use of that fancy language, I think the cooking class would be more useful, because that's a life skill that a person will have for decades and decades and decades. That if they have the knowledge and don't have the life skill or the interest, how when you learn something young, whether it's a physical activity or a hobby or something like fishing or hunting, when it's instilled young, you tend to have that for life, right? If you could teach young people that cooking is fun, cooking is cool, when they're 35 and 55 and 75, they're not going to say, oh, I'm tired, I don't feel like cooking. They're going to get the cutting board out. They're going to get a sharp knife out, and they're going to, in their bones, chopping up carrots and chopping up celery and chopping up mushrooms is something they've been doing their whole life. It's relaxing, it's social, it's fun. And whether they know how much fiber is in that food or anything like that,
it doesn't matter.
No. And to add to that, as a parent, one of the things that we started incorporating with shopping is, my kids got to choose like a fruit or a vegetable, let's make it fun again, right? Let's try something.
Try something new.
We don't have to like it, but we could try it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're trying things and introducing things it's like, you don't have to eat, but let's try it together. Let's figure out how to make this. Let's make it interesting again. And to me, I think that was the fun part for them, because it's like, well, what should we do with this, Mom? I want to, there were so many different things you could get in the store, but that way they learn a palate.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They expose themselves to something different.
Yes.
It's not like you're doing the same thing over and over again. And then sometimes too, the other thing that we learned is, like, especially for my husband during different times, seasonal food sometimes can be inexpensive, like fruits and vegetables seasonally, right?
Yeah.
But you don't have to buy that in the off season in the produce. You can go to the frozen part, right? I mean, we didn't do a lot of processed maybe potatoes, but like in the wintertime when fruit is not available in the Northwest, I mean, our blueberries are not in season anymore, but they're still good frozen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think the seasonal point is a great one to bring into this cost conversation. Up here in Maine, especially if you're interested in going apple picking, you can get a whole bunch of fruit at a very, very, very low cost.
And the taste is so different. Oh,
yeah. And then
I had to do that once.
in the summer, we're similar with blueberries and strawberries. And then, as it starts to get colder here, you can do great with all of the winter squashes.
Yep.
And, again, we could poke holes, there are people listening to this could poke holes and, have different perspectives on the nutrition. But if the comparison is to Cocoa Pebbles, then it's hard to argue that an acorn squash isn't better than Cocoa Pebbles.
Right. And I'll even argue, I know somebody's going to poke holes in Janet's comment about us feeding our kid oatmeal. Let's face it, oatmeal's not the problem.
No.
Now, I will say that there are certain people that should not eat oatmeal. Right. My son was not one of them.
Sure.
Right. And that's one thing you have to understand when it comes to eating. We're talking about some fruits and even berries and stuff. And, I will say that there are some, if you are a diabetic, I think you should stay away from fruits, at least until you are metabolically healthy. Sure. Just don't eat some of those kinds of things.
Sure. So it's important to be able to understand those distinctions, right? Your son at the time you're describing might have been eating 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 kilocalories a day, right?
Yes. He's like 6'4" now.
4 or 5. He was probably eating 4 or 5.
In a perfect world, maybe all of those 4,000 or 5,000 kilocalories would come from vegetables and meat, right? But in a regular world, he's doing quite well with some of that coming from things like oats, beans, and rice.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
So as we wrap this podcast up, Jason, tell us what you have a passion for.
I have a passion for the change process. I have a passion for all things nutrition, all things exercise, but what I have the most passion for is help a person go from a lifestyle that isn't serving them to a lifestyle that is helping them live their best life. That's what I have the most passion for, is getting in there and working at that level of psychology to help a person create a better way of living for themselves. I
love it. And if anybody has any questions, I'm streaming your website here. Tell us a little bit about that.
So you'll see on there a couple of cool resources to get started. I've got a good collection of articles on there. I've got a good collection of special reports. That's a good place to start on my website. Digs into a lot of the questions a person probably has if they're starting to think about making lifestyle improvements. And then there's information on there about my online wellness community. There's information on there about reaching out to me about personal wellness coaching. There's information about this. If someone else out there is a podcaster and would love to have a wellness coach as a guest. And I think the other big thing on there, if there are businesses out there that want to be cultivating a wellness culture, I often come in and make presentations for businesses. So all that kind of information is on my website.
So cool. You're a wealth of knowledge, and you're always so fun to talk to. And we could keep this conversation going on and on and on. It's so nice to see. I do think, Jason, that there's a shift in the paradigm. I think people are starting to wake up and realize, what it is to eat healthy. And I will just give a little tip to some people. It's like, there's some presidential candidates that are talking about healthy food and the government needs to change big food and all this kind of stuff. Just let me give you guys a big tip right now that are listening. The government is not coming to save you. The good food is already out there. We don't need to change our food system. I mean, if the free market changes our food system, then so be it. But I don't think the government needs to focus on it. The government's the one that screwed it up with the food pyramid. So, listeners and viewers, do your own thing, put good things in your body, make your own decisions. Don't trust the government to do that for you. So that's a wrap. Jason, I really appreciate you being on. We're going to have you on again on another subject. We could talk forever. Let's see. We do have a comment. I'll let you, if you can read that, Jason. Let's go ahead and maybe it's a comment, maybe it's a question. People from Kayleen, people need to learn how and why our food industry. I just talked about that. Great timing, Kayleen. Has switched from beef, pork tallow, and replaced it with vegetable or seed oils. Our government and medical industry work together to push this. It's so true. Remember that attack on deadly eggs and cholesterol killers. We must go back and learn more about why we leave a bone in our roast and cook a whole chicken in our soup. Yeah, that wasn't a coincidence. That we need the fat and tallow that is healthy for all of us. That is so true. Thank you for your comment. Thank you for watching, Kayleen. And those are things that we can do that the government is not going to help us with. So tune into our podcast Monday, Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, 12:30 to 1:30. We have kind of a topic. David Steinman's is an author, and he's going to be talking about how his book about how chemicals are killing our kids. So this is right on topic. And Jason, thank you for being on our podcast today. We really appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning in to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. Tune in 12:30 to 1:30 Pacific Standard Time Monday. Thank you.